Hi, I'm Neil.
And I'm John.
And you're listening to World of Telly, the podcast where John and I watch every single TV programme ever made in no particular order. And what are we watching this week, John?
This week we're watching Wonderman.
Right, now for those of you unaware of this show, Wonderman is an 8-part comedy drama series created by Destin Daniel Cretton and Andrew Guest. It stars Yahya Abdul-Mateen II and Sir Ben Kingsley, and it's the 17th television series set in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So, John, Marvel Comics, did you grow up with them like I did, or were you more of a DC person?
I was more of a Dandy, Beano, Beezer, Topper, Shiver and Shake kind of person.
That universe doesn't exist yet, I'm afraid.
No, soon to come now. I'm looking for the Shiver and Shake is merging with Whizzer and Chips comic universe.
So you didn't read Spider-Man or anything like that then? You must have done.
No, I really didn't. No, I think I got one Spider-Man comic in my life. I think I got some kind of Disney comic that had exclusively Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck and people like that in it.
Right.
And the Marvel stuff and DC stuff completely passed me by, unless you count Doctor Who monthly and weekly, of course. And in fact, probably of those type of comic strips, the ones I read the most were the ones in Doctor Who weekly and Doctor Who monthly.
So I'm guessing you've never heard of Wonderman before this TV show then?
I hadn't, apart from the Danny Kaye film of the same name. That's the only Wonderman I was familiar with before this.
Actually, having said that, I'm a Marvel Comics fan. I read them when I was growing up, and then I got back into them in the early 2000s. And even I have only a vague memory of who Wonderman is. He's the D-lister, I guess you'd say, which is why he's the 17th television series and not the first. And it's crazy because on paper, Wonderman is the strongest superhero on the planet. You know, he could take on the Hulk, he could kill Thor. And yet no one's ever heard of him.
I mean, I know they have boring names sometimes, but and I'm a Williams myself, but Simon Williams is one of the more boring names. I mean, he does really sound like the guy from Accounts, doesn't he?
The only thing I remember about him is that he was an actor. That was the thing that differentiated him from everybody else. But he also wore some of the worst costumes. He was in the Avengers for a while, and in the 80s, he wore this red leisure suit with a big yellow belt. He looked ridiculous. They do sort of do a nod to that in the TV show as well. Shall I fill you in on a brief history of Wonderman?
I am all ears.
No, I did start out doing some research on this, and about halfway through, I just thought there's absolutely no point to this because the Wonderman in the TV show is completely different to the Wonderman in the comics. He first appeared in 1964 in an issue of the Avengers. He was created by Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, and Don Heck, and he was a bad guy. He was somebody who was born to a rich industrialist who was in competition with Tony Stark. One of these bad guys gave him the opportunity to have superpowers so he could kill Iron Man. So that's how he started as a bad guy. He then got killed, then brought back to life, then killed again, brought back to life. There's lots of convoluted stuff to do with the Vision,
Yes.
from WandaVision.
Yeah.
That's his brother, basically.
Really?
It's it's very
Okay.
complicated, yeah. And then he joins the Avengers, the West Coast Avengers. This is the Avengers that's set in Los Angeles rather than in New York.
Right.
And he becomes an actor. And the reason he's employed as an actor in the comics is because he's a superhero, because he can do all his own stunts and he will never be killed.
Okay, that's interesting.
He can drive a car and explode. So it obviously saves a lot of money on the special effects. So the TV show sort of inverses that. Whereas in the comics, you've got a superhero who happens to be an actor. In the TV show, you've got an actor who happens to have superpowers. And I think that's a very interesting way of coming at the character. So it's completely different. Now, the other thing is that this is not the first time that Wonderman was supposed to appear. He was originally supposed to appear in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, and he was going to be played by Nathan Fillion.
Oh, yeah.
Who you may know from Firefly. And
Yep.
they actually mocked up loads of movie posters, sort of like the Simon Williams cinematic universe, but they cut all of his scenes. I suppose that's a good thing in the long run because we wouldn't have this show, but that would have been an interesting, more sarcastic take on the character, I think, more in line with the original comic character.
Who's the guy that played Wonder Man?
Brent Wheeler. Man, he was in a lot of stuff in the 80s. I always loved the sunglasses that he wears. When I was your age, I always wanted a pair. So bad.
So cool. Mm-hmm. And his jetpack.
I hadn't even heard they were making this. And I think that's because I had Marvel Cinematic Universe fatigue. Did you have a similar experience? Did you go and see the films?
I think the only one I went to see was Endgame at the cinema.
trust you to go to the last one.
Exactly. I didn't ring you up just before I went to find out what was happening in all the others. No, I'd seen them fitfully and quite enjoyed some of them, I suppose. But I think that the TV stuff, basically, I know you mentioned that there've been like 17 different shows, but it adds up to nearly 500 episodes of TV.
That includes the stuff they did before Disney. That includes Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I think there were 7 series of that.
That staggered me. There was like an ABC era, wasn't it, when they partnered with the terrestrial broadcaster ABC. Then there were the Netflix ones, which were on my radar a little bit, and I went back to them. There was things like Jessica Jones. Was it what's it called?
Iron
Defender.
Fist.
Iron Fist.
Iron Fist, Luke Cage.
That made me laugh. Iron Fist, whose power is that he has,
An Iron Fist.
Yes, exactly. That seemed to me to be quite limited. And I can't believe it. What's the one that's the lawyer? What's he called? Daredevil, yeah. And I must admit, I went back to some of those and looked at them. I didn't watch Jessica Jones. I've heard good things about Jessica Jones, but I never got around to it. But everything looked a bit like Law and Order. Very kind of, this is a TV series that you might normally watch, except a man with an iron fist is going to wander in at some point.
They only ever do their stuff very, very sparingly.
Yeah, exactly. As sparingly as possible under available budget. And then they think, oh, we'll have a series where we get all these people together as well, which was, what was that?
Defenders.
Yeah, Defenders.
Yeah, I'd tuned out by that point.
The thing is, it seems to me that viewer fatigue, kind of when you've got that many episodes, sets in quite early. But they also didn't have like loads of tortured rules about what they could refer to in the films and what could never touch on that continuity. So you've already got a continuity nightmare industry going on.
Those Netflix years, they were not in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. They were separate, like in a pocket universe. So yeah, they couldn't intrude on what was happening in the films. But now all those characters, well, Daredevil and Jessica Jones, have now been resurrected in Daredevil Born Again, which is currently playing on Disney+.
Yeah, and that's an interesting bit, because I thought one of the things that fascinates me, and we'll maybe talk about it a bit more later, is that Wonderman is under something called Marvel Spotlight. And they seem to be wanting to kind of put up yet another category of material that almost seems that they wanted to alert people that this is slightly different. What it seems to be is they want to say, hey, Marvel people, this might be a bit different.
Yeah, I think the thinking behind it was the Spotlight series, which again is based on a comic series called Marvel Spotlight.
Ah, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, they take characters that, aren't well known. And I think what the argument is that you don't have to have done loads of homework to watch it. Although, having said that, there are a few things you do have to have watched for this to make perfect sense.
Well, exhaustive knowledge of Ben Kingsley's career, for one thing, but yeah.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. But I think it was trying to say to people like my wife, for example, who wouldn't watch this, as soon as she saw the Marvel logo, that was it. She just walked out, which is a shame because I think she would have enjoyed it. But I think it was trying to say to the audiences, you don't have to be a Marvel fanatic. And also that it doesn't really fit into the larger picture.
I think that definitely does work, because it worked for me, because I'd seen very little of the TV stuff. In preparing for this, I decided to watch Loki. And I have to say, I thought that was exactly what I hate about all these programs in a really big way. Criminally, the first episode of Loki was just the most incredible amount of lead and exposition I have ever known, because it was almost like it was trying to say, oh yeah, you might not have seen all these films, but we'll explain it all to you, but in the worst conceivable way that just made, for me anyway, really terrible television. And previously I'd heard people talking about that as, oh, you should watch Loki. You don't need to know a lot about these things. And then, of course, you end up watching something that's about alternative timelines and the multiverse and things like that. And I was just thinking, who are you trying to kid? Whereas Wonderman was definitely self-contained for now and very much enjoyable, and didn't need to do my homework.
You watched a bit of She-Hulk,
I watched a bit of She-Hulk.
I told you to watch the last episode because it's like Gurney Slade, isn't it?
Yes, it is. There was a very effective bit where they break out into the menu screen for the MCU, which was quite interesting. Her powers became so powerful that she could break through the fourth wall. But again, most of it was about being a sort of class action lawyer, wasn't it?
So yeah, that was in phase 4 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Yeah, they're much more complicated than the faces of the moon, aren't they, these faces that MCU have?
I'm a huge Marvel fan. I know more than the average person about Marvel, but I'm not an expert, so don't write in if I make any mistakes. But even I was tuned out. I didn't watch Echo. I didn't watch Agatha All Along. I didn't watch Ironheart. All these programs passed me by. And I wasn't going to watch Wonderman when it came on because they dropped all of the episodes in one go, which is quite unusual these days. Usually they spread them out. They might release one or two. But the fact they released all 8 at the same time made me think, oh, this is probably really bad.
Yeah.
But I thought I'd watch the first episode because they're really short as well. That's the one thing we've also got to mention is quite unusual. They're less than 30 minutes, most of the episodes.
One comes in at virtually 21 minutes, like the length of an episode of Meglos.
And I thought, I'll just watch the first episode and just see how bad it is, knowing nothing about it, never saw a trailer, didn't know anything about it. And I ended up watching all 8 episodes in one night and absolutely loved it. And I immediately texted you and said, we must talk about this program because this is the one episode of the year when we come out of our comfort zone and talk about something contemporary. And I think Wonderman is Marvel's Andor. It's a cut above the usual stuff that you get.
Simon Williams is superpowered, he's unstable, and incredibly dangerous. This country isn't safe until he's in my custody. You sure he's buying the act?
Don't fret. I've got him right where I want him.
So the origin of this program is quite interesting. It was originally conceived as a joke. It was going to be called Trevor Slattery Goes to Hollywood. Now, I guess we need to mention the character of Trevor Slattery. He first appears in Iron Man 3. Do you remember him from Iron Man 3? Did you see it, John?
Well, I saw it in preparation for this. You told me not to watch it, so I did.
I told you to watch one scene from it.
It was basically a very going through the motions kind of film, wasn't it? But the interesting bit in it was the fact that they had the Trevor Slattery character, sorry for spoilers, everyone, playing a character called the Mandarin. The Mandarin was terrorizing the world, murdering politicians and blowing things up and doing all the kind of things that supervillains do. But actually, he wasn't really a supervillain. He was a proxy for someone else. And it was a British actor. A drunken, drug-addled British actor was actually playing the Mandarin. And Ben Kingsley, we'll talk about him an awful lot, but Ben Kingsley plays him as a Scouser with a sort of vaguely Ringo Starr type accent. And, you know, Ben Kingsley is from Manchester and obviously knows the area very well and knew the Beatles a little bit, but it's such a weird accent. It's not entirely quite right, but it works nicely for the character because he's played so many roles and he's played so many theatre roles. I think part of the joke is that the accent is, what is his accent anymore? Does he even know what his accent is? After so many years and so many drugs and so many performances.
I think it was quite a clever thing that they did with the Mandarin because the Mandarin in the comics is, well, I guess he's Iron Man's arch nemesis. So it's kind of odd that he didn't appear until the third film. But the thing that was holding them back is that he's basically Fu Manchu.
Yeah.
And there's no way you could depict that character like that. So the fact that they did it in this way as almost a joke was particularly effective. And then after that film, there's a little mini movie, like a 10-minute called All Hail the King. Did you watch that?
I did, and that's in another series of Marvel things called Marvel one-offs or one-shots, I think, aren't they? So there's yet another phase within a unit, within a module of the Marvel world.
There'll be a quiz at the end of this podcast.
That was Trevor in prison, wasn't it?
Yeah, it gives the backstory to how he got the role as the Mandarin and ends with him being kidnapped by the real Mandarin because they eventually decided, we'll just hire a Chinese guy. It's fine, you know. And then he appears in Shang-Chi and the 10 Rings of something or other.
Yeah, the Legend of the 10 Rings, yeah.
What happens in that one, John? Because you've seen him more recently than I have.
Yeah, Trevor, oh God, you know, I've seen him more
He's
recently.
in a pocket universe, isn't he?
Is he?
I think so.
All I remember about it is that it's quite a plod. It's like every other Marvel film I've ever seen, which basically is they set up a few vaguely interesting things and then the last 45 minutes are just a massive battle. And Trevor basically hides out with lots of cute animals. Trevor's just a kind of almost entirely benevolent character.
Yeah, he's comic relief, isn't he? He's just there for the jokes. And to be fair, there are some quite funny bits. There's the bit where he talks about how he became an actor because his mum took him to see Planet of the Apes.
I was sitting in the cinema next to my mum watching mastery unfold before my very eyes. After the film, I asked her, how did they get those monkeys to do those things? And she patted me on the head and she said, it's not real, pet. It's just acting. That's when I knew. If they can teach those monkeys to act that brilliantly, just imagine what I could bring to the world.
And they do link it back in, don't they? Because they try and explain that because he got broken out of prison early, and that's part of the
That's right.
plot
yeah.
in the series.
It's quite nice that they actually follow that up because they could quite easily have just not bothered.
And in a way that doesn't matter if you haven't seen the film, because they do it quite painlessly and without any kind of massive exposition of any kind.
Why do you look familiar?
Trevor Slattery, trained at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, did bits and bobs in the West End.
Weren't you the Mandarin?
Then I took a role posing as an international terrorist to pay my drug and prostitution debts.
So anyway, they were going to pitch another show.
Mm-hmm.
It was going to be called Trevor Slattery Goes to Hollywood. It was going to be a comedy. And that's when they combined it with the Wonderman pitch, which was also going to be a comedy.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't they say something like, what if FX did a Marvel show?
Yeah, exactly. Rather than it be a normal Marvel show, what if kind of FX that did things like Fargo and Atlanta and, those kind of shows, if it could be a version of that. And they, I think, pulled that off in the fact that it's very distinct from the other shows.
So the showrunner is Andrew Guest. Now, Andrew Guest, you'd know as one of the writers from Community.
Mm-hmm.
And because the Russo brothers also directed lots of episodes of Community and then went on to be big stars in Marvel. They did Endgame, I believe. They were obviously deeply embedded in Marvel. And then when Wonderman came along, they said, or actually it wasn't Wonderman, when Hawkeye came along, they said Andrew would be perfect. So he comes on board and it's quite a checkered production that they went through. In fact, the program almost never came to be.
Yeah, it was almost cancelled by the 2023 writers' strike.
Yeah, they were halfway through production. They postponed the show. And they were going to write it off as a tax loss in much the same way that DC wrote off the Batgirl film. They would have filmed half of it and no one would have ever seen it. God, that would have been awful.
Yes.
But they managed to persevere, thank God. Like I've said before, I think it's probably the best TV show Marvel's done. And we've been postponing this for as long as possible, but I think it's now time to talk about Sir Ben Kingsley's career, John. So settle back with a nice cup of tea. Now, the reason we're doing this is because Ben Kingsley and Trevor Slattery are very much linked at the hip, aren't they, in terms of their careers?
They are, because of the fact that, Trevor's obviously from Liverpool or, that neck of the woods. And so was Ben Kingsley, as I mentioned. But the other thing is they tie it in very explicitly because Trevor's got a flat in LA, an apartment in LA. And when they go in there, Simon Williams, by the way, we should say that Simon Williams is an obsessive film watcher. That was something he shared with his dad, who died young. And, he kind of compensated for that by becoming obsessed with films, and he even mentioned his mum saying he spends all of his time with Criterion Blu-rays and so on. And so basically he's got an unusually encyclopedic knowledge of not just film, but also British television, it would seem. So when they go to Trevor's apartment, the first thing he sees is a script for a film called Turtle Diary. And Turtle Diary was a film that Ben Kingsley was in. It's adapted by Harold Pinter from Russell Hoban's novel, a film that's quite hard to get hold of. And straight away, Simon names the director, also does a little pre-see of what the film's about. And then they see on the shelf some VHSs. One, which is really a deep cut, deep cut, is an upside-down VHS marked The Velvet Glove, which was a 1977 BBC series that Ben Kingsley was in one episode of, and is quite hard to get hold of. And then there's a Coronation Street VHS, because of the fact that Ben Kingsley in real life was in Coronation Street briefly and played a character called Ron Jenkins, who is also name-checked by Simon Williams. How did he know that? Where does he get his UK TV from? Does he listen to our podcast? The episode numbers, 616 to 618 and 646 to 649, are correct as well. Even bigger than that, earlier when they're in the cinema, he refers to an omnibus documentary, again from the 70s, called The Need for Nightmare, where Trevor plays Edgar Allan Poe. But of course, Ben Kingsley played Edgar Allan Poe. So there's this constant intertwining of the thing. I think they're having a lot of fun. I said to you as a joke, I should look back at Ben Kingsley's Coronation Street videos. And then you said it's mentioned in the show. And I thought, what?
Turtle Diary, directed by John Irvin.
You've seen Turtle Diary?
Of course. You and Glenda Jackson free a couple sea turtles from the London Zoo, but you really free yourselves along the way.
Yeah. No, yeah. How am I just realizing that now?
Coronation Street. You play Ron Jenkins, right?
Well done. A pint of bitter, please, and one for my friend. Every Brit did their stint. The producers were thrilled to get me after my run as Lear.
It's interesting about Ben, or sorry, Sir Ben. They even make a joke about that, don't they, actually, which is quite funny. Because, of course, Ben Kingsley's known as being a slightly starchy character and very keen on being called Sir Ben. But, I mean, when he started his career, he was in Granada shows. He was in Pardon the Expression, which, by the way, is pretty terrible, the episode that he was in. Coronation Street as well. But around that time, he was in some musical production, and Dick James, who was a publisher of the Beatles songs at the time, wanted him to have a pop career and was all getting ready to package him as the latest thing, and the Beatles were encouraging him to do that. But he got offered a role at the RSC, Royal Shakespeare Company, at the same time, and decided, probably wisely, since Dick James was a bit of a shyster. But he went to the RSC. He was a protege of Trevor Nunn and had such a kind of impressive career in the theatre that he didn't really do an awful lot of TV. I mean, his big thing at the theatre, and that sort of informs part of Wonderman, because he references Hamlet very specifically a few times. There was a director, a woman director with the astonishing name of Buzz Goodbody, who was the first woman to direct Hamlet at the RSC in 1975 in the theatre, it's kind of corrugated iron theatre next door to the main theatre at the RSC called The Other Place. And she cast Ben Kingsley as Hamlet. Patrick Stewart worked with her as well, and they all speak very highly of her. But it's a really tragic tale because they were previewing the play and she committed suicide. And Ben Kingsley talks about how incredibly traumatic that was for him. And of course, as is always the way with these things, that play went down as being one of the great productions of Hamlet. And in fact, that whole way of doing things influenced studio theatre for the next 20, 25 years, all coming from Buzz Goodbody's work. After Hamlet, he was in Crown Court, playing one of the barristers, and he was in something like The Velvet Glove. Really, other than that, at that point, most of the things that he was in on TV were transfers of TV versions of plays that he's done for the theatre, like Keane and The Merry Wives of Windsor. And this is the question that we have to ask about this, is that he was in Gandhi in 82 and he won the Best Actor Oscar. And that's wisely not referred to in Wonderman.
Ben does Gandhi and Trevor gets hooked on drugs and prostitutes, because the VHS that's in prominent position is Fern Gully 2, which I don't think Sir Ben Kingsley was in.
No.
Who played Gandhi in the MCU. And this is on a postcard.
And was the Coronation Street in the MCU the same kind of Coronation Street?
There's a tradition in the theatre of handing down your prop to the next generation. This particular skull's had quite the journey. It was used by David Garrick when he played Hamlet. He gave it to Keane, who passed it to Irving, who passed it to Burton, who left it in a bar, and I nicked it.
Turtle Diary, like another Pinter play that he was in, a film version of a Pinter play called Betrayal. Both of those films, maybe through something to do with the Pinter estate, are incredibly hard to get hold of. They've never been released on DVD. So you can imagine if the character Trevor had been in a film like Turtle Diary with Glenda Jackson, but it kind of sank without a trace, that nobody would recognise him playing the Mandarin. But another actor who worked with him did recognise him playing the Mandarin. So didn't any of these people who might have recognised him, like Simon would have recognised him, for example, didn't they think of reporting him to the authorities and said, you know, that Mandarin who's threatening the planet is actually Trevor?
The general public seem to think he's a real terrorist, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. Which is a very funny running gag, isn't it, throughout? Just to round that off is that the basically Ben Kingsley was in a few things after Gandhi on TV. Particularly well-remembered period drama at Christmas 1985 called Silas Marner, where I always remember my mum saying, oh, he's got such a kind face, which he does actually have that. There's some very nice, touching moments in Wonderman that he does. But really, after that, he didn't really work in UK TV again.
For me, he's Don Logan in Sexy Beast.
And that was a big fillip for his career, but also the fact that he maybe was known for Gandhi, but was suddenly known for being this total psychopath. They even had a play with that in quite a meta episode of The Sopranos, where he plays a version of himself. When one of the gang, Christopher, is trying to set up a film career, one of the mafia is trying to set up a film career, and they go and pitch him a film, which I think is called something like Grind. And there's some very funny scenes as Ben Kingsley is trying to get rid of them because he obviously doesn't want to work on this terrible film. It's worth watching.
Wonderman is played by Yahya Abdul-Mateen II. Now, were you familiar with this guy?
I wasn't until this.
I remember seeing him in Watchmen, the TV series version of Watchmen. He plays Dr. Manhattan in that, so he spends most of his time walking around naked, painted blue.
Okay.
He's also in Aquaman, plays the bad guy in that. He seems to always appear in films with man in the title, because he's also in Candyman, the remake of that.
Yeah.
He's in The Greatest Showman. And I believe he's in a new TV show, which is coming out the day that this podcast is released.
Yep. Man on Fire. I mean, does he just like having a particularly eye-catching CV with just man, men, all the way down on it? He's very, very good, I think.
Yeah, he's excellent. He's really good. He's next appearing in David Fincher's next film, which is a sequel to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Is it called Man in Hollywood?
No, it's called The Adventures of Cliff somebody.
Oh, at least he's breaking the pattern. That's something.
TV show's very upfront with the influence of the film Midnight Cowboy. One of the earlier scenes in the show is Simon Williams, who's a struggling actor in Hollywood, goes to a matinee performance of Midnight Cowboy, which Trevor just happens to be at. And you can see Ben Kingsley crying at the end. And I thought when I watched Wonderman, I thought, oh God, they're going to kill Sir Ben Kingsley off, because that's what happens obviously at the end of Midnight Cowboy. Simon Williams is like the new guy trying to make his way in Hollywood. And Trevor is the old hand who's trying to show him the ropes. And that's the similar dynamic that you have in Midnight Cowboy. And of course, in Midnight Cowboy, doesn't the Dustin Hoffman character, isn't he originally going to rip off John Voight's character?
Yeah.
And it's a similar dynamic. And then they become friends.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's all a setup, isn't it? Because Trevor has been employed by something called the Department of Damage Control, which I think I mentioned in a Spider-Man movie. And what I like about Wonderman is the stakes are very low. Even the villains are very low stakes. It's just about filling a quota of arresting superheroes. There's no big threat or anything like that, no world-shattering event. It's quite low-key. And Trevor is blackmailed, because he's supposed to be in prison, like you mentioned earlier. He's blackmailed into trying to find out if Simon Williams has superpowers, because there's some suspicions that he has due to events that have happened in his past. For the first couple of episodes, it's quite clear that Trevor, he doesn't really care about Simon at all. And he's quite happy to like spy on his family and record them.
Yeah.
Until about halfway through the series, and then there's a moment where he decides that he can't do it, and they become firm friends. It's quite moving, really. It's a very nuanced performance, I think, from Sir Ben.
It is, and it's quite, I think, like the series itself, it's quite, that's unusual, a word I don't use very often, it's quite charming, isn't it, the series?
It is very charming.
And it's got a warmth to it. And I think, you know, one of the things we haven't mentioned yet is that traditionally in the old days, it used to be said that never do a program about Hollywood or behind the scenes of a TV program or film, because the general public just don't like them. And they don't tend to do very well. But of course, recently, there's been a bit of a rash of them, hasn't there? There was The Studio, which did very well, won loads of awards. And yeah, it certainly had its moments. There was the god-awful The Franchise, which
Terrible.
I had to bail out of. But again, it was very kind of similar. The thing about Wonderman, which is good, is that it's kind of, as you say, it's small scale, it's focusing on actors in particular and the things that they go through. And it both recognizes the ridiculousness of how actors can be, but it's also kind of warm and on their side. And it does enough to offset the kind of general cynicism that those other shows had in buckets.
At the beginning, Simon comes across as a bit of a narcissist and quite unlikable in the sense that I wouldn't have employed him. He's just takes things far too seriously, to the extreme.
Yeah, at the beginning, he's overanalyzing his script and they deliberately cut his character out because he's too much of a pain in the ass to have on the set anymore.
I thought it was interesting that they used real TV shows. They didn't make stuff up. It was American Horror Story, I think, and there's references to other shows that he's been in.
You get a very early instance of the actress, whose name escapes me, who's appearing with him in that scene. He's playing herself. She's in the Twilight series of films.
Oh, I haven't seen those.
No, I haven't either.
No,
Why would I watch those?
There's Easter eggs everywhere, isn't there, in this thing?
It's just that I thought, you know, it was worth mentioning because it's an early indication of the fact that they're going to do that kind of thing throughout the series.
The basic plot is, like I mentioned, Sir Ben Kingsley's character is spying on Simon Williams, but in the midst of this, they're both going for roles in a film version of Wonderman, because in this universe, Wonderman is a comic character who was in 80s films. And they show clips from that in these terrible costume, the original costume that he used to wear. And it's filmed at the exact same place that Captain Kirk fights the Gorn. And in this universe, Wonderman's going to get a big reboot. And he's going to be rebooted by a very prestigious director called Von Kovac. Now, for me, it jumped out immediately that this was Stanley Kubrick. What did you think?
I think there's a lot of elements in. I think there's his accent and his appearance to an extent. There's a hefty dash of Werner Herzog in there, isn't there? I think, because even though the idea of Werner Herzog living such an opulent residence is not very likely, but he does live on the Hollywood Hills. I mean, famously, Herzog was being interviewed, wasn't he, by Mark Commode, and he randomly got shot. He just breaks off to speaking to Commode and goes, "Oh, I think I've just been shot." And Commode doesn't know what to do, but somebody took an air rifle and fired at him. So there's definitely a bit of Herzog in there, I think.
And Von Kovac is going to make a big screen version of Wonderman. And I think this is Marvel taking a bit of a jab at Martin Scorsese and Martin Scorsese's recent comments about Marvel movies not being real cinema. So to have this sort of auteur director come in to film Wonderman, I think it's a little bit of a dig at Martin Scorsese. Incidentally, Martin Scorsese's in the next Star Wars film.
Is he? Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a bit of a reaction, isn't there? They're like, what? They can't believe such an artist would do this. And some of his methods of auditioning people are absolutely insane. Like, you have an old injury on your arm. You have no eyelids.
A superhero remake. Not exactly what we'd expect from an Oscar-winning director.
Why not Wonderman? Human and spectacular. That's where this film needs to live. Superheroes are part of our lives now. So what we will find when we look at Wonderman today, what can he teach us about ourselves?
There's lots of references to other films. There's actors in there playing themselves. There's a couple of semi-famous ones. I mean, Josh Gad, are you familiar with him? I've never seen Frozen, so all those jokes went over my head.
I did know about him through that. And Josh Gad is also in that Armando Iannucci thing called Avenue.
Oh, Avenue 5.
Avenue 5.
Yeah.
Josh Gad played the insufferable Trumpian type in that. That's what I knew him from.
And Joe Pantoliano, I'm going to just call him Joey Pants from now on. Which I believe that's what they call him in Hollywood because it's just such a mouthful. And he's playing himself as well as like Trevor's nemesis in the acting world.
Yeah, because there's a very funny payoff at the end of the series as well, isn't there, about Joe Pants, which is good. Because when they go over to do the self-tape, I think self-tapes, which is episode 2, is it? It is a very, very good episode. They go to his place, is another opulent pad, which he has. And of course, Joe Pants is set up, as well as being his nemesis, the exact opposite, because he's saying acting's just a job. You need to get into real estate. I got disgustingly rich. And he's got a tree in the middle of his house, which he has to kind of open the skylight for. But that leads to a speech from Trevor saying acting is a calling, the most important thing a human being can ever do, which is both funny and touching in that scene, but also absolutely ridiculous as well, and the kind of thing that actors say. So it's kind of...
He sells it well, though.
He does. He's a good actor, isn't he, Sir Ben?
Acting isn't a job. It's a calling. It's the single most consequential thing anyone could ever do with their life.
The thing that creates the tension in the program is that Simon Williams is repressing the fact that he's got superpowers. And the reason he's suppressing the powers is, unlike in the comics where being a superhero helps you get the job, he can't actually be an actor in this universe because of what's called the doorman clause. And there's an entire episode that explains the doorman clause. It's all shot in black and white.
I quite like the fact that it's not about the fact that, I guess, because I don't really know the X-Men, but they're sort of feared, aren't they? There's prejudice against them from public at large. In this case, it's just that they can't afford the insurance premiums to get them in the film. And I quite like that. That's more of a realistic reason to me that Hollywood would take that line than it is that they just don't want them on the set.
It's a complete contrast of The Boys, which I know you haven't watched, but in The Boys, all the superheroes are also movie stars, which I think is more realistic than what we get here. I mean, because what's interesting about this program is at no point does anyone ever sit Simon down and say, you've got superpowers. Do you not think you might, save the world or something?
As the series goes on, that's what is interesting about it, because he has got something that anybody would want to do, they might want to do, is to be an actor, and particularly to star in this film, which means so much to him. And that's actually much more important to him. He just sees the superpower side of things, probably even before the dormant clause was enacted, as being, something that's going to get in the way. He's not interested in it. He's interested in his talent, which his dad kind of speaks to him about, that you see in a flashback, that his dad kind of encourages the talent above anything else. And so that's actually more important to him than having superpowers. But that changes by the end of the program, doesn't it? At the end of the series. But the Dorman episode's interesting because I've seen a lot of people online, when I looked stuff up after I'd watched it, really, really liking that episode and praising it. And I sort of know what they mean. It was quite interesting. But for the first time during the program, even though it's only short, again, it's like half-hour episodes, I could feel myself getting slightly twitchy about it. To me, I think I've got an inbuilt dislike of what happens a lot with streaming series. And it happens all the time now, which you have
Treading water.
an episode. Well, you tread water, you kind of pad them out. And for this, which is a short series anyway,
Yeah.
to have a paddy out episode, which, okay, you might say, I'll give you a pass on that because it's telling a particular story. It's still delaying the inevitable end and it's stopping the narrative going. It's the episode after the one-off kind of like story that bugs me. They did it in Severance recently. And in this series, there basically is the Doorman episode. And then there's an episode where somebody sees Simon's superpowers and they have to go on a bit of a chase to stop his superpowers being revealed. And this is all when they're supposed to be on the way to the audition, which is the only thing you really want to see, is them go into the audition, because that's continuing the story. So what you get is 2 episodes, and the second episode is ridiculously short. As I was saying earlier, it's barely 22 minutes. I find it annoying.
I think the only reason that subplot was in there was to get a little bit of a glimpse of Simon's powers, where he has the fight scene. And what's interesting
Yeah.
about that fight scene is that he doesn't have a clue what he's doing. He's just throwing people around. There's no coordination.
Yeah.
I think he kills somebody in that scene, by the way.
Yeah, I think he probably does. And that's the thing, isn't it? But that's why it was also disappointing, because we could take it as read. All we needed was that scene that we'd already had,
Yeah.
where he's at his family do, and he smashes their newly installed kitchen island. That's enough for the actual story that they're telling. You have a backstory to a superhero type thing, which is very Marvel TV series. And then you have to show Simon beating people up like a superhero. And that's what was a bit of a letdown, I think, with both of those episodes.
Where the hell we go?
Are you gonna use super speed or what?
I'm gonna use my car, Trevor.
Does that mean you do or do not have super speed? Let's go!
Another source of tension is Simon's brother, Eric. Now, in the comics, Eric is a supervillain called the Grim Reaper. And he's like an antagonist in the sense that he's sort of ashamed of Simon. Acting is not a real job, that kind of thing. But in the end, even Eric, is a nice guy. Again, low stakes, but very satisfying, I think.
Yeah, and they definitely sort of set it up that he might be kind of like trying to queer Simon's pitch, because the family obviously know about his superpowers.
Yeah.
And someone called Kathy Friedman, the New York Times journalist who's profiling both Simon and Trevor, when she says she's going to talk to Eric and Simon's mum, there's obvious terror there that he's going to blow it for them. But he actually just said nothing but nice things, she said, doesn't she? Which is nice. It works well.
If you don't want to know what happens at the end of the program, then go away and watch Wonderman. Where can they watch it, John?
It's on the Disney Channel.
Disney Plus, that's right, yeah.
Sorry, Disney Plus, yeah. Sorry, I haven't got the new lingo. It's on Disney TV.
We're going to spoil a little bit of the ending now, because what basically happens is that Simon loses his temper when he finds out that Trevor's been betraying him, and he blows up a sound stage. So what Trevor does is he takes the blame and becomes the Mandarin again. It's quite funny at the end because Trevor's part is recast.
With Joey Pants.
Now, would Stanley Kubrick have cast a terrorist in one of his films? Maybe.
I can actually see that.
It seems like a stretch, I've got to say.
Who's going to tell Stanley not to? That's the thing. He had the strange power over everyone, didn't he? So
because
who
Trevor
knows?
had it all in his palm of his hand, but he sacrifices himself for Simon, so Simon gets to live his dream, and he gets to wear a nice red leisure suit, which is a nice nod to the comic character.
I love the bit where they arrest Trevor as the Mandarin, and by now he's just because the other thing that's nice is that he tells the world that he blew up the film studio by doing a self-tape of himself as the Mandarin, which is another nice callback to the early episode. But also when he comes out and meets the agent saying, I don't know what kind of trick you're trying to pull. And he just goes, Trevor was the performance. The Mandarin, you dolt, and gets to call him sort of stupid names and do this stupid voice
You
all the time.
never
which is
saw me coming. It's great. They could have ended it there, but they don't. There's an extended epilogue. I like it. I think it's great. But it goes on for quite a while, and Simon's now famous, big movie star, and he goes undercover in this small town in Yucca Flats, I think it is, where the Supermax prison is, which is holding Trevor, which is bizarre, like he could harm anyone. And he pretends that he's doing research on a new role that's coming up with one of the security guards who works at the prison. And to cut a long story short, he ends up getting into the prison and he breaks Trevor out. And the last we see of them is flying through the roof of the Supermax as Everybody's Talking plays on the soundtrack. It's a great moment.
It is. As you say, the thing I like about it is that I think that when Simon reaches everything he's dreamed of, and is, starring with Joey Pants in Wonderman, and, he's got the pick, thanks to Trevor, who told him not to sign up for any film until it came out. He's got the pick of all the roles he's got. And his agent says to him, you can pick your next project. What's it going to be? And of course, the project is to free Trevor, because he knows that Trevor sacrificed everything.
Yeah.
So he could live his dream. But then the dream's done. And you get the impression that actually, because of the way he breaks in, and because of the way he gets out, he's obviously become very familiar with what his superpowers are. And this is where you get the idea, I think, of the sequel starting to be obviously slightly set up, was the fact that he was going to get caught anyway by what they called the Department of Damage Control, because they've realized that he's got even greater powers than they thought. And they make this comment, which is very Marvel, where they say he could be a terrifying weapon or a great asset. And then he breaks out of the prison, which is supposed to be impossible to get out of.
Yeah.
So it's because now he's embraced being a superhero.
There's a scene just after the premiere of Wonderman where Simon's talking to Von Kovac and they talk about never do a sequel. And I thought the very same advice should be taken about this. When I saw Wonderman, I just assumed that was it. It was a one and done, which is one of the reasons why we're covering it on the show, because one of our rules is that we only talk about TV shows that are finished, which is why we're not doing Doctor Who until next year. And I thought there's no way there's any more story to be told, but it's got a second series. I don't know how I feel about it.
They clearly left it open for a second series, but I imagine because of things, as we've talked about, the tortured genesis of it, and the fact that maybe not that much was expected from it. I really like the way that he spent time with the guy at the end, who's the guard at the prison, even though I think giving him tons of money anonymously might just end up with him getting arrested for being bribed to let someone into the prison. But I won't pick on that too heavily. I don't mind the idea of seeing more Simon, more Trevor, but you can't help but feel it's going to go down much more superhero stuff.
Yeah, that worries me.
It's going to be exactly what the absence of what made this program good. It did surprisingly well, and critically, it did very well, didn't it? Everybody liked it, basically.
I don't think they were expecting anything, and I think it shocked them, and that's why they announced a second series, because no one saw that coming, as Ben Kingsley would say.
I don't believe in doing sequels to anything.
Same.
That's a losing game. There is no way we would ever top that picture.
Impossible.
But maybe it's worth thinking about how we could do it, if we were to do it.
Something like Wonderman, it's clearly, to me, there's just on a creative level, there's an idea that what some people wanted to do was a nice little comedy about actors trying to pick their way through Hollywood.
Yeah.
But the only way now you can do that is to adopt some kind of superhero handle for it, and you try and get away with as little as the superhero stuff as you possibly can. But then I guess there's also the fact that now streaming is in such dire straits for virtually all of the companies, because everything costs too much to make, is that you're starting to see things be scaled down. We've already talked about this is 8 episodes, very short. I'm sure it still costs a packet. But then you've got the recent Game of Thrones series, which is very stripped back, kind of like smaller scale.
Mm-hmm.
As we're speaking, I think it was like yesterday or this morning, Disney are imposing enormous job cuts on Marvel today. Over 1,000 people are going to lose their job at Marvel. And then in between me taking note of that and us doing this recording, the BBC have announced they're looking for 2,000 staff cuts. there. And it just increasingly is kind of looking, well, like, what can be made on TV now? What do they want to invest in? It's increasingly looking like things like Andor, which cost an inordinate amount of money, looked great. You could see where the money went and all of those kind of things. It's just not going to happen in that way anymore. It's not all bad. There's a lot of people talking about, wouldn't it be better if some things were smaller scale, less bombast, paying for, up and coming actors that unfortunately nowadays have all been to Eton. It might not be necessarily the worst thing, but the fact that if you want to make a nice small scale drama, but the only way of getting it is trying to fool money men that it's actually a superhero TV program is a bit of an issue, I think.
So that's Wonderman. I thoroughly enjoyed it and would recommend it. I guess you would as well, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. With that caveat about those kind of 2 middle episodes. But no, I liked it a lot. So much more than I was expecting. I would never have watched it unless you'd told me about it.
So what are we doing next, John?
Next, we're doing Nigel Neal's Beasts.
In between that, we've got our Patreon, which is free to join, and John writes an essay to accompany the podcast. What are you going to be writing about this time, John?
I'm going to do a bit more on the TV career of Handy Bendy Kingsley.
No, you're not going to do Marvel comic history or anything like that?
You could do that one.
No, you're all right. Okay, so until next time, I've been Neil.
And I've been John.
And you've been listening to The World of Telly.
Had nothing to do with Pizzagate.